the suffering that we go through has gotten way out of hand. All of us suffer pretty much to a certain extent every single day, no matter what happens. It could be whether somebody said something to you, or you have certain thoughts about yourself, or you just believe that you're not good enough, for whatever reason. We all suffer, and I feel like the majority of suffering is mental and emotional. Part of it is physical, obviously, because we all have bodies, and bodies, over time get weaker, and you go through injuries, you get hurt. But that type of suffering, I feel like physical suffering is something that we can't really avoid. It just, it just happens, due to old age or whatever, you get an injury or whatever happens. But the majority of suffering, I feel like, is mental and emotional. And for us to stop all that fucking mental and emotional suffering, there's certain things that we have to realize, which I don't think a lot of people do realize. And the funny thing is, I realize that as well, but even knowing that, I still suffer mentally and emotionally, because I forget. And that thing that I'm talking about that most people don't know is the fact that one of the main reasons why we suffer mentally and emotionally is because we identify ourselves with our name and our persona. So basically that constitutes an ego. And you probably already know what an ego is, but my definition of an ego is the feeling of me, the feeling of my name, my first name, my last name, when I was born, my occupation, my height, my weight, the way I look, the way my eyebrows are, what color my eyes are. All that stuff is something that you identify with, and that entire persona, that entire thing becomes an ego. And so the reason why I think we suffer mentally and emotionally so much is because whenever something hurts our ego or attacks our, somebody attacks our looks, or we feel that we're not intelligent enough, we always identify with that, and we suffer because of that. So for instance, there's so many things that happen in my life, but for example, somebody could tell me that, oh, you're a pretty quiet dude, and I'll think of what they said, and I'll think of that statement, you're a quiet dude, and I'll associate that with my first name, last name, and I'll think, man, that sucks, she called me a quiet dude, maybe I'm quiet, maybe this, maybe that, and you start to identify yourself with your first name and last name, and that thing that other person was calling quiet or not confident or whatever, you see your first name, last name being quiet, right? And because of that, you suffer, because if you didn't identify with your name and last name, if you didn't identify with the ego, that fake personality or that fake persona that you have, then there isn't something to suffer. And it's kind of a hard thing to explain, but if I could explain it in a different way, I would say let's say you're doing an exam at school, and you don't get a good grade. Let's say you get a grade of like 40%, right? So you basically failed, and everybody else around you got a grade of 75, 80%, and you're looking at everybody else and you're thinking, man, like those guys are probably way more smarter than I am, and here I am with just a 40% grade, and that fucking sucks, right? And the reason why we suffer is because we start to compare ourselves with other people. We start to think, oh, that person is so much more smarter than me, and I'm not that smart. And obviously that would happen because there's a difference in grades. You got 40%, other people got 80%, and so that comparison literally just happens between different egos. You compare yourself, your sense of identity, with the other person, but you fail to realize that the thing that you're comparing yourself to, the thing that you're comparing to other people, doesn't actually exist. Like, you are not your first name and last name. You're just an awareness that experiences things, right? So all this shit, all of our bodies, all of our minds, our intelligence, whatever we have, it's gonna go away one day, and it doesn't last forever. So whatever is not permanent can't be real because it doesn't last forever. So when you're comparing yourself to other people, you suffer because there exists a person that has to suffer. You know, if you just realize that you are just awareness, and thoughts arise in your mind which are not yours, they just arise, and things happen to you which are not you, they're just things that are happening, you wouldn't suffer. But because you identify with your first name, last name, there exists a persona that suffers. Hope that makes sense. So mental suffering, emotional suffering, psychological suffering, all happens because we identify ourselves with our ego. And I want to talk about more mental suffering as well. So like obviously every single day we have a lot of thoughts that come into our minds. I think I read somewhere that it said we have around 65,000 thoughts that come inside of our minds every single day. And a lot of our mental suffering happens because we believe the thoughts that are in our minds. Whatever thoughts that arise in our minds, we just focus on them so much that we start to believe them, and we start to think that we are the ones that are thinking those thoughts. But we fail to realize that we aren't the ones that are thinking those thoughts. Those thoughts are just those thoughts are just arising in our minds without us having even done anything. They're just automatically appearing and disappearing. It's like, it's just like they're appearing and then over time they just go away. But sometimes those thoughts are so strong that they start to create a story. And because we believe that story of our thoughts, we suffer, right? So there's so much mental suffering. And like, I'll give an example where, let's say you're 18 years old, you have a girlfriend that you dated for 6 months, and at the end of the 6 months, you guys start to lose that spark, and then she decides, so, you know what, I'm gonna leave this person and I'm gonna go hang out with some other guys. And so you guys are still dating, but that the girl goes out and starts, let's say, cheating on you, right? And you find out like a few weeks later that she was cheating on you, and all of a sudden, you're hurt emotionally, which is totally understandable, right? Because you trusted this person for 6 months and whatever. And so you lose that trust and you have that emotional pain, which, by the way, emotional pain, yeah, it sucks when it's there, but that also goes away after a while. But then you also have mental suffering. And the only reason that mental suffering happens is because as soon as you found out that she started cheating on you, you start having these thoughts that arise in your mind. And such thoughts could be, it could be something like, oh, like, I knew I was too short, or I knew I wasn't good looking. I knew I wasn't good looking enough, to keep that girlfriend, or maybe something's wrong with me. Maybe like I'm not attractive enough. Maybe I don't have enough money. Maybe I'm just, I'm just destined to never have a girlfriend. Maybe I'm not like, I don't have a sense of humor. So you start thinking all these thoughts, right? And then they start to create a story. I'm a person who is unlovable because I'm unattractive, I'm ugly, I don't have a sense of humor, I'm not tall enough, and as a result, no girl is ever going to want to be with me. And you literally form this belief in your head based on random thoughts that arise, and you just start to believe it, and that's why you suffer, right? And what makes the suffering even worse is that you associate all of these thoughts with your ego. So let's say you have a first name, last name, obviously. All these thoughts that arise, the thoughts that create a story, you associate this story with the first name, last name. And so then there exists a persona that suffers because of that story. So like that story exists, and then there's a person that that story applies to, and that person is the ego. But you think that you are the ego. You think that you are the first name, last name. So because of that, that story affects you because you believe that you are that story, right? So, but if we can literally all just learn to realize that that story inside of our heads is not real. That story is just something that is just occurring randomly without our permission, without our knowledge, and it's just happening. And if we can just learn to observe those thoughts and not really identify with them, then those thoughts will still create a story and will still create all these random scenarios, but it won't be that strong because you don't believe it. And as a result, there won't be beliefs that are formed because of those thoughts. And this is a hard concept to understand, and it's really hard to explain, but the one thing that you just have to realize is you are not your thoughts, and you are not your ego, and you are not the story that your thoughts create. You're just awareness, pure and simple. All you are is awareness, and you should just be here and observe everything that is happening to you and never take anything personally. And that is basically it. I'm gonna talk about this topic a lot more in future videos, like just how thoughts affect us and where thoughts come from and all that. But for now, that's all. Okay, see you guys. Peace.